Welcome to everyone around the world joining Ask the Howlers episode 31, where today we're going to be discussing the timely zero-day vulnerability Log4j or Log4Shell. For those who don't know me, my name is James Alliband. I'm a senior security strategist and manager of product marketing at VMware. Now, just before we do dive into the session today, remember, this is a cybersecurity expert roundtable where trusted advisors and security strategists, and we've got two awesome guests today fitting that absolute nature. We're here to discuss the latest threats, security challenges, provide actionable tips and resources, and of course, most importantly, answer your questions. So just before I do introduce my awesome guests, I want to remind you, of course, that we've got the Q&A running. This gives you an opportunity to ask your questions, of course, being timely as we're going to discuss Log4j today. Any questions you have that we can answer, we will answer them. And we'll ask those questions live at the end of the session. Also, when you are posting to the Q&A, please put where you're from, your country or your state. I love to see which locations everyone's joining us from. We always typically have people around the world, from Australia to Hawaii. So it's awesome to see where you're all from. So please put where you're from and your question. So let's dive in and introduce my guests. First off, we have Karen Worstell. Karen's joining us from Denver, Colorado. Karen is a senior cybersecurity strategist at VMware and has served as a CISO for the likes of Microsoft, AT&T, Russell Investments. Today, Karen spends her time influencing CISOs around the world on topics from zero trust to stopping their security operations teams from suffering with burnout. Karen, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, it's great to be here, James.
Awesome. And next, we do have Brian Baskin joining us from Baltimore City, Maryland. Brian is a manager of threat research at VMware, specializing in incident response, malware analysis, and threat intelligence, with over a decade of experience in digital forensics, network intrusion analysis, technical training. And of course, Brian is taking a brief break from his Log4Shell analysis to join us on the stream today. Brian, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, James. This is a much needed break.
A much needed break, I am absolutely sure. Karen, Brian, it's such a pleasure to have you on the stream today. Of course, we typically start these with an icebreaker, but given the urgency of today's topic, I'm going to park that and we're going to jump straight into today's topic. Of course, today we're talking about Log4Shell or Log4j, the zero-day vulnerability that took the industry by surprise late last week. And since then, it's been non-stop race to patch and stay ahead of the attackers. Karen, I'm going to start with yourself. Can you set the stage for our listeners today on what Log4Shell is and why it was such a severe vulnerability?
Sure, I'll give it a very broad overview because I'm sure many of the security practitioners who are listening to us, if they have a moment to do so, are really familiar with what's going on. But in general, Log4j, it's a flaw in a Java library for logging error messages in applications. And it's as ubiquitous in our infrastructure as salt. One of our cybersecurity strategists here, Tom Kellerman, he likens it to the struts in the infrastructure of a bridge that connects one area to another. And if we undermine those struts, everything gets weaker. This is a 10 out of 10 level vulnerability because it is so ubiquitous. It's used everywhere, and we've got an enormous job ahead of us to be patching it. So it's easily triggered. It doesn't require any authentication for somebody to get in. So it's kind of hanging out there and making a wide open cannonball size hole for attackers to come in. It's a big deal.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned to me yesterday, actually, when you said it's like as simple as changing your name in an iPhone, for example, can trigger the vulnerability.
Yeah,
and it's just like blows my mind in that perspective. Brian, as part of VMware's threat analysis unit, of course, you've been spending the last few days observing, analyzing Log4Shell. What does the security community need to know?
Yeah, this is actually becoming a very fluid event. This is one that over many days, we've had our guidance change from the industry, from Apache themselves, and we've had to stay very, very flexible in that. Where a lot of our organizations, a lot of the industry has spent the entire weekend working nonstop hours to patch their systems, only to find out on Tuesday or so that they had to redo that effort because of a new exploit. So we also realize across the industry, this is a very hard time. And we also really like to push the idea that a lot of companies are struggling right now, struggling to stay on top of this, struggling to stay on top of the patching, struggling just to find the environment, the servers in their environment. And it's a very important message that you are not alone in this. This is very much a shared trauma across the entire industry in cybersecurity and DevOps and DevSecOps to keep this alive. As far as what you need to know right now, there are mitigations out there. Many of the mitigations have shown to be insufficient to stay on top of this threat. The overall solution has been to patch. However, I do say that tongue in cheek because that's not a simple solution for many organizations. Everyone says just patch your items, just patch your servers. It's not that simple. We all know that. So there definitely there is that need though to have a plan in place to say, okay, we cannot do this over the holidays. However, we do need a plan. We do need a timeline. We need the resources available. So this is the time, as far as what you need to know and what you need to go into this, is that this is your time to actually plan this patching, plan those ideas. Don't rely on mitigations. Rely on, and also as well, it's easy to fall trap to the stream of live data coming in that at some point becomes a distraction. It becomes a lot of speculation, becomes a lot of ideas. It becomes a lot of people trying to test out proof of concepts for new exploits that don't really work. But it's definitely focused on your environment, what you have, good assets, eventually roll out a good patch plan to your environment. I think that's some of the core takeaways that many of our customers and across the industry needs to be aware of.
It's super interesting as well when you think about, and I remember my days patching servers, and you think about last Friday, typically for a lot of organizations would have been the Christmas shutdown. We can't touch anything after that. We're not going to drive into January, and now it's like, well, we've got to do something about it. Karen, you always talk so elegantly about SOC burnout and, really helping organizations really get through these tough times. And I think it's a good reminder for the security industry, as you said, Brian, there that, you're not alone, but people who, maybe, CISOs of the world and the board level people that may be tuning in, I think it'd be a great reminder from yourself as well, just to, to help people understand kind of what the security teams are going through at this moment in time and how we can support them.
Yeah, that's such a great point, James, because the truth is that here we are. This is what always happens. I mean, we joke about it because it happens so often in the cybersecurity community that it's either, 4:00 on a Friday or right before a big holiday or, any of those events where people, in general are going to be taking some time off and maybe kind of like getting a chance to decompress. That's when the security teams get the most busy because our attackers know that that's a prime time, to take action. So what ends up happening is our teams really do live on the edge of burnout. And we know 51% of them are telling us that they're burned out now and many of those are looking to get out of the industry. And the reason for that is because of this kind of a dynamic where, this is actually probably the biggest patch panic I've ever been through in 30 years in this industry. And it feels like it's really not going to end for some time because it's so fluid and it does keep changing. So make sure that you are aware of that. And you're going to need to find some time or way to rotate people, to give them some chance to rotate off and get some decompression time. And so pay a special attention to that. Staffing, maybe some extra benefits and perks. In one time in my life, in my career, I spent the period from Halloween until Easter in a war room, and that there's a certain amount of bonding and camaraderie that goes along with that, and the energy that provides. But at the same time, it's exhausting. It's utterly exhausting. So be really mindful of that. These teams are going to have to be working on this one for a long time, and we need to make it sustainable, not flame everybody out.
No, absolutely. I think it's so important. And Brian, of course, also with VMware's threat analytics unit as well, we've been in the midst of, investigating and researching this and trying to get the truth and really understand this as quickly as possible. What's that been like as you've been sitting in the war room as such, in the war zone to drive that through? What's the last few days been like?
It has been a challenge, and I cannot compare ourselves to what many in the industry are doing right now who are actually working in DevOps. It's been a little bit easier on the actual threat analysis side, but we did see this come out Thursday night, very late at night, about 10, 11 p.m. on Eastern time. We start seeing the noise about it, and it got into our radar, something we would need to track first thing Friday, and Friday morning for our global team. And it picked up steam quick. We saw it come fast. We saw the public notice of it, and we expected that. So of course we rolled into the weekend, we brought the team together. We focused extremely hard on determining assets, working across the company. What were the assets? What can our team provide to the individual teams? This is a special situation where you do need specialty. You do need segregation of information. You need people who are sort of separated out to say, okay, what are the indicators we're seeing in the wild so that we can provide it to another team to actually work upon those things. So these are, definitely a big issue going across. For ourselves, long days, specific, we know that a lot of the teams that we're working with also have their own already daily obligations, and this just tacks on top of that, which extends their days out. And to Karen's points of as far as burnout and mental stress, we are definitely seeing a lot of teams who are trying to juggle between this important reactive responsiveness and what they have to be doing to keep their job going. And so we've definitely seen that as well across the teams we worked with this last week.
On that as well, and shifting into the vulnerability, Brian, obviously you mentioned it earlier around like this is a really fluid situation, and a new patch from Apache was released this week due to the second vulnerability. Can you give our listeners clarification on why this new update is so important?
Absolutely. The one, I don't want to put excuses on why certain designs are made. What we do know is that the overall exploit was available to allow the compromised server to reach out to any internet address, any local address, given a host name or IP address. The first set of mitigations were to, one, not create those remote connections using a Java flag. The actual 2.15 patch that came out blocked remote connections. However, they did allow local host connections. They allowed the machine to be able to communicate back to itself because it was shown to be very business important to have that capability for the people who actually requested that capability of doing LDAP lookups in the first place. However, now it's found that can still be exploited. That can still be exploited to point back to local hosts and cause a denial of service attack and crafted messages. There are situations where the payload does not have to exist on the internet. The payload could be put onto that host through some other means. And in that case, it could still be exploited out through this exploit. And so that's where the 2.16 really comes in play, not just disabling remote, but also disables across the board, no connections, local host whatsoever, turns off that capability.
So, Brian, you spoke earlier about like the practical advice that organizations should be doing today, but what implications does that have, and what should we be looking at as we step into the months and even years ahead with either this vulnerability or vulnerabilities like this as well?
There are a large amount of implications that are come out of this attack. And Karen mentioned as well, this is going to be a long-term issue that we're going to be facing. This is not just happening over this week. This is not just happening over this month and then it'll be taken care of. This will be a long process as we go into the next few months. So what the issues we're going to see is the companies that are slower to patch for whatever various reasons they have internally. Some of those could be the biggest issue overall, and we say this, is that you have to know where your vulnerable systems are. Asset management. We always say you have to know where your servers are. However, again, tongue in cheek, because that is the hardest thing for most organizations to do. It sounds simple, but to actually have a map of where your equipment lies that's internet connected is extremely difficult. And so what we're going to find is a lot of organizations need to put that investment into their time to do these basic steps, to get themselves to a strong baseline to be able to do the next steps of securing them. Between the machines that are slow to patch, we're also going to see the ones that do patch. However, they disregard what happened prior to that time. So very sure there are systems that are compromised right now. They're expecting going to be a long dwell time, which is the time between compromise and actual impact on the system. So we expect to see systems that are now compromised, but there are no visible behavior to show that. And then once the company does come in and patch it, the adversaries already have a foothold in the environment, and they can use that at a later date to come back in and perform their actions. So we're definitely expecting that to happen. We're also definitely expecting that companies, the industry, the public will discover random new applications that they did not know were vulnerable to this attack. A lot of corporations are focusing on their web browsers or web servers. They're focusing on their major critical internet-facing servers. Something like a Minecraft server, which is where a lot of this actually originated from when they discovered it in their chat, is going to be out of mind for most organizations. Many organizations don't realize how many apps they have that are internet exposed. They don't realize how many are actually available once an adversary gets in through the some side channel, and they can pivot to this against a local host. So we're going to see that come up a lot. Also, I think the biggest issue, and there's one I really want to get back to the mental stress of this and the mental fatigue, is that we are in a hyper critical state where there's a hyper amount of attention being paid to every alert. And across the board, when hunting through environments, when looking through alerts, through security panels, we have a tendency to know and see things we generally dismiss as false positives. We see this a lot, we dismiss it, we move on with our lives. There's going to be a critical hyper-focus right now to not do that anymore. Yeah. Many organizations. They're going to be focusing on all the false positives. They're going to make sure that nothing got past them. However, that also means incredible amount of stress on them, incredible amount of work's going into it, and the overall internal stress that many feel that they cannot let it pass them by. They don't want to be the single point of failure to miss the attack as it occurred and be held responsible for that. Even though no one's at fault with these attacks, we're not the bad guys. The bad guys are the bad guys. We're going to see that impact on the industry. We're going to see that impact on security teams over the next few months. And it's just going to grow even larger.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to kind of follow up on that a little bit more, Brian, because I remember my very first security incident that was a long-term game of whack-a-mole. And it went on and on and on. And it was constantly one of these situations. And this present situation reminds me of where are they now? And how far did they go? And that whole thing about lateral movement through the environment and setting up, command and control within the environment, needing to find that, doing the threat hunting, wondering if this is significant, wondering if it's not. You can't turn it off. And you might go home, but you don't turn it off. You're still in it all day long. There was some really funny memes on that on Twitter over the weekend. And so, it's like, it's in your toaster. Wake up and go check something out. That's what we have to be mindful of, is that the psychological impact of this, the emotional impact of this is significant. And I think there's another aspect to it, and I'd love to, if I can, bring this up, and maybe we talk about this at a future date. But here's the thing for leaders, the leaders in the organization, recognizing that when something like this happens, the whole security response team and that whole security response effort is a little bit like being at the very long tail end of the whip. So the second something happens, we're in total reactive mode, and it goes on for potentially weeks. We have to sit down and take a look very thoughtfully at what we've done to get to this point. And I'm all about, like rapid development, DevSecOps, all of those things. We want that. We need to figure out how to do these things in a way that keeps track of where we're using these libraries, that keeps track of where we're patching everything, that we set in place processes that and automate as much as possible things that upstream help us detect threats and vulnerabilities early, and avoid as much as possible the reactive downstream thing that happens when something activates it and now we're in reactive mode. So yeah, the proactive measures that we need to put in place in the way that we run our information systems, and whether it's in the cloud or on-prem or whatever it is, we've got to get that figured out and do a better job.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think this is, as a long-term issue, we're going to see new pivoting on this exploit. We're going to see it come at us from every angle. What we've seen already in active exploits or attempts at them is the issue of actually exfiltrating environment variables in memory, and exfiltrating keys, exfiltrating things that are just existing, they're locally set up on the machine. So 2 months from now, we're going to have compromised AWS servers. We're going to have compromised other events, not the patch server itself, but just based off information it's stored, we're going to have these other events that fall out of this. And it is important that as security-minded people, we do keep that in mind, that we cannot hyper-focus on one event. We still have to come back to the basics. We have to understand what are our points of ingress and egress. Where is our data stored? Because this can pivot to a whole other data source that we just don't know that it's now available to our adversaries.
Yeah.
And so knowing the basics, going with a clear mind, going with a clear pattern with plans, SOPs, knowing that, and this is the great time of doing that, is getting ahead of that reactive ability of saying, we just spent the last week in the trenches upgrading our servers. Let's document that. How do we do that? Let's put that on paper, because we might be doing that again in 2 months. We might be doing that again in 2 weeks. Let's find a way of automating that after the break. And that is definitely going to help and save a lot of teams.
Yep. It's very challenging when we go into patch after patch after patch mode, because we're really layering a lot of things on top of one another. And there's no real way to know what all those interdependencies look like over time. So it gets really complex very quickly. And I don't know what the answer is, but getting back to the known clean state, what is the baseline? We're going to need to all take time to do that at some point, so we know where we're starting from, and when the next one comes, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do that are just solid basic cyber hygiene and vigilance practices that can be put in place. Now is not the time to add that onto the team's plate, but at some point down the road, we're going to need to be looking at that. And so, yeah, there's a ton. What I love about this, actually, though, in the middle of the crisis, is all of the people that are pulling together to try to respond and to fix this and do the right thing. And there's tempers are flaring here and there, but on the whole, people are really showing their best, and even in the work that's being done at the highest levels of government in the private-public partnership, working with CISA and the JCDC, and that VMware is a member of, along with a number of other companies. All of those things are coming together to try to help this respond. So this really is truly a national effort.
That's a great point, Karen, because that really brings me into the collaboration perspective that I really wanted to touch on. I know that you can talk deeper into this as well, because of course, I think it's been really refreshing from that perspective. And I couldn't agree more that, like, between the public and private sector, we've taken this positive approach. It's, I almost think that when people are under the cosh, like, there's two ways that people go. Is that you either sink or swim, right? And we're starting to see a lot of people swim. We're starting to see a lot of people just step up and say, hey, we may not get this right, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to do it together. and that's such an awesome approach from that. But what is your take on the progress, Karen, that we have made, especially the initiatives such as CISA's joint cyber defense collaboration with, of course, the VMware is a member of that as well.
Right. The progress, I have to look back at this over the course of a lifetime really working in this sector, and to see a level of collaboration that's coming together and sharing of information. We're doing more now than we've ever done before. Getting the word out, the alerts and the information that we need in order to formulate a response is coming out in a way that's more complete and more accurate and more timely than we've ever had it. So that part is terrific. We have more people working in the industry focused with the skills that they need to have than we've ever had. We're training more people to get in the industry and do the job than we've ever had before. So there's lots of good things. We need to make sure that we go further, in my opinion, and start to have the conversation about what we need to do about I'm going to just say it, the accumulation of 20 years of technical debt. And what we have to do collectively now to step up to the plate and do the kind of analysis of the issues that have led to a point where we have a software library that is as ubiquitous as salt throughout our environment that ends up having a major vulnerability in it now that's being exploited widely. So what do we have to do in order to not be in this situation again and again and again? This is going to take us a long time to clean up. And I think both the federal, the government sector, as well as the private sector have work to do to figure out, like, cybersecurity is one of the pillars of business innovation. It's going to be one of the pillars of being able to continue to do business the way we do it of all of our economies. Let's go focus on what we have to do to get this done right. This is a knock moment. This is a knock moment. We have to get serious about this and figure out what to do.
It is, and I said it yesterday, Karen, that like some of our greatest mistakes are some of our biggest mistakes are our greatest lessons, and I really hope that we do take that mistake and spin that into a positive, because I couldn't agree more. 20 years worth of technical debt, but at the same point we can learn from this, and I really want to spin this into a positive. Like, we can learn from this and we can move forward, and we can try to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes again. And actually spinning that into to a SOC burnout element as well is actually help the people sitting in the trenches, working their backsides off basically to make sure that they're are not going through these same situations just because we're not changing, essentially. Brian, sorry, I want to add on to that
real quick. And as far as a collaboration standpoint, when we talk about this as an industry-wide issue, we've actually seen that a lot, where there's always been back-channel communication between companies and teams of what are you seeing today and what are you seeing as far as this. We've seen that grow immensely. There is a cybersecurity leadership group I'm in where someone actually has started crowdsourcing a PowerPoint deck of how do you present this issue to your C-levels? How do you ask for more budget? How do you ask for staffing? It's getting everyone on the same page as far as how should we respond to these types of events, knowing it's not just an individual person, but it is a larger thing, and let's all handle this at a proper level across the board the same way, the good way, the best way.
Yeah, but it goes back to the old narrative that we've spoken about so often, that the CISO or security personnel should be sitting on the board having these conversations and making sure that security is elevated at that level. We've said this so often, but it's so true. And in these situations, we have to be able to have those board level conversations. Guys, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. We have got one question that came in, and Karen, I think you'd be able to talk to this. There's reports of a wormable version. So can you speak to this about the reports and maybe add some light into what we're seeing at this moment in time?
Right. At a broad level, there is a variety of opinion about the, I guess the natural thing to expect is how will this be exploited in a very devastating way and widespread way. And a worm, would be the scenario for that. What I would basically say at this point is I think the jury's a little bit out. There's a variety of opinion about how damaging a worm would be. And I'm not going to jump to the most dire perspective on that because I'm hopeful that we have the nature of this particular vulnerability and the nature of an exploitation of this is going to run into some problems of it being a widespread, devastating kind of a worm event. But it will probably be a worm. So yes, I think I would expect that it's going to be wormable. I would not expect necessarily that it's going to be, doom and gloom, but prepare for that. And remember that we have to patch everything that's external facing, obviously, but you have to patch everything internally as well, right? That to prevent the lateral spread of this and to prevent this from being one of those internal breaches that just lead to the ability for this to be a island hopping kind of a scenario. So let's look at it from that standpoint. And yeah, expect that, prepare for the worst, and let's hope for the best.
Brian, do you want to add anything?
Sure, I will talk to the dire side of this. When Karen mentions lateral movement and island hopping, we are seeing this not only as one organization being used to compromise another organization, we also see it as a pivot into the environment itself, into the inner core. So not only, and this is an issue we're going to see, is these SOCs and security teams are focusing on their internet-facing resources only. However, all it takes is one compromised internet-facing resource that has a gateway connection into the inner side to cause all kinds of issues for you. We have environments that are internally segregated into multiple networks, and all it takes is a vulnerable environment, a vulnerable exploit, to just jump across those segments into new network segments, into areas that are internet-based, are structured off from the internet overall. We do have some dire circumstances that could come from this, which is going to require, again, an overall status. And don't focus solely on individual machines that might be the internet. Focus on your environment. Don't let anything come out of your site. This gets back to asset inventory. This gets back to good posture. But we do definitely see that as a conceivable threat. We've not seen it in a while. We've seen attempts at it. We've seen tests at it. We've seen lots of exploits attempts being made. As far as like the actual large-scale attacks going on, still few in number. But we do expect those to grow.
Yeah. Remember, we're still, it's the 16th. We've still got a week to go before the Christmas holiday. So there's a lot that can happen in the next few days.
There is. Be prepared. Be prepared. I'm going to wrap the session up, team. This has been awesome. Such a timely topic to discuss. And I think that you've both given such awesome insight. Some of the feedback and the comments has been like great insights. So thank you for joining me today. This has been Ask the Howlers session. Of course, we've been talking about Log4J today. So with that, I'm going to close us out. Happy holidays, everyone. Have a great new year and see you back in 2022. Thank you.